The Galactic Senate chamber was a colossus of polished stone and hovering platforms, an arena of intellect where empires decided the fate of worlds. Today, Earth stood trial. Humanity's fate would be sealed with a simple vote, either acceptance into the fold or isolation, locked away like a wild beast deemed too dangerous to roam free. A murmur rippled through the gathered representatives, a mixture of disdain, curiosity, and cold calculation. The Zenari Chancellor, Vorek, rose with an air of absolute certainty. His voice carried the weight of centuries of precedent, his kind having presided over the Senate long before Earth's first radio signals even brushed the void. "Humanity is an anomaly," he declared, his elongated fingers tapping against the data slate before him. "Their existence in our interstellar community is a mathematical impossibility. Their world is hostile, their nature even more so. They have committed untold violence upon their own species, and now they extend that same recklessness to the stars." A quiet murmur of approval followed. The evidence was overwhelming. Wars that had scarred their history, unrelenting industrial expansion, an almost pathological defiance against forces that should have wiped them from existence. There was no denying what humanity was, a species that had clawed its way up from death and ruin, unchecked by the natural order. Their colonies spread not to fertile, habitable worlds. Vorek continued, voice smooth and practiced. No. They seek the uninhabitable. They conquer lands where the air itself is poison, where gravity crushes most life into pulp. They see hardship not as a barrier, but as a challenge. This, esteemed members of the Senate, is the behavior of a species that does not adapt to the galaxy, but forces the galaxy to adapt to them. More voices murmured in agreement. A few remained silent, uncertain. The balance of power was tipping, but not yet fully collapsed. Ambassador Celia Mendez stood, representing Earth's official delegation. She was composed, refined, a career diplomat who had spent years learning the intricacies of galactic law and rhetoric. She knew the moment she spoke, the weight of her entire species rested on her words. "Every species in this chamber has a past," she began, measured but firm. "None of you were born in peace. None of you reached the stars without struggle. Yes, humanity has fought wars. Yes, we have endured suffering. But the same could be said of many others among you. The only difference is that we—" Vorek raised a hand, cutting her off with a practiced motion of authority. "You misunderstand, Ambassador. It is not your history that damns you. It is your nature. Conflict is not a tragic necessity for your kind. It is your identity. The moment you set foot in this chamber, you brought it with you. You do not belong." Silence followed. Mendez hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. But before she could speak, another voice rose from the chamber floor. A slow, deliberate thud of heavy boots against polished stone. The sound alone carried weight, a presence that did not belong in the realm of delicate diplomacy. The chamber stilled as the figure moved forward. He was not from Earth. That much was clear. His uniform bore no ambassadorial insignia, no polished emblems of rank or nation. His presence did not request attention, it demanded it. Broad-shouldered, taller than any being in the hall, his movement carried a lethal efficiency that had nothing to do with politics. His name was Rylan Tor. And he had come from a world where weakness meant death. Rylan Tor stepped forward, his boots echoing in the stunned silence. The air in the chamber seemed to tighten, the presence of something foreign, something unrelenting, settling upon the gathered senators like a storm on the horizon. Eyes followed him, some filled with wary curiosity, others with outright unease. The Zenari Chancellor's gaze narrowed, his delicate frame stiffening. He did not bow, did not offer the courtesies expected in these halls. His stance was not that of a politician or a scholar, it was that of a survivor. His voice, when it came, was steady, measured, with a weight that did not need to rise in volume to command attention. "You speak of humanity as if it is a mistake," he said. "As if we are an anomaly, an accident of nature that slipped through the cracks of your ordered universe. You sit in judgment, safe in the belief that your empires will stand forever, that the comforts of your worlds are the natural end of progress. You believe this because you have forgotten something fundamental. He raised his hand, scarred and weathered from battles fought on worlds that would have broken any other species. He curled his fingers into a fist. The universe does not care for your peace. It does not care for your laws, your treaties, your illusions of control. The void is not empty. It is hungry. And it has not stopped hunting just because you pretend it isn't there. A ripple of discomfort passed through the chamber. Some senators exchanged glances. Others scoffed, unwilling to let fear take root. Vorek, ever the politician, recovered quickly. Are we to believe humanity alone understands hardship? He countered, folding his hands before him. That only you have faced the cruelty of existence? The civilizations in this chamber have survived wars, disasters, extinction-level threats. We have learned to create stability, not wallow in endless cycles of destruction. Ryland tilted his head slightly, as if appraising him. And in all that time, have you ever faced a world that tried to kill you every second of every day? Have you watched children learn to fight before they learned to read? Have you buried those who hesitated for a single moment, who mistook mercy for survival? He let the words settle before continuing. I come from Acheron 4. You call it a death world, but to us it is home. A place where the air is laced with toxins, where the rain corrodes metal, where the ground itself moves to consume the unwary. We were given nothing. We took nothing for granted. And yet we endured. His gaze swept across the room, unwavering. Humanity was born from struggle. It has shaped us, defined us, and it has made us strong. You fear that strength because you do not understand it. You believe that it must lead to conquest, to destruction. But strength is not just a weapon. It is a shield. It is the hand that lifts another from the mud. It is the will to stand when others would kneel. A silence deeper than before settled over the chamber. No one moved. No one spoke. Even those who had been most eager to condemn humanity hesitated. For all their power, their long histories, their vast empires, none of them had ever spoken like this, not as rulers, but as those who had earned every breath they took. Then Ryland's voice dropped lower, colder. You think you can contain us? Quarantine us? You believe that you can decide what humanity will become, as if we are some errant species waiting for your approval? He shook his head. If you lock Earth away, you don't just lose potential allies. You make inevitable enemies. And that would be a mistake. The chamber did not erupt in chaos this time. It did not explode with shouts of outrage or heated debate. Instead, a new tension took hold. The kind that came when creatures that had long believed themselves safe were forced to recognize a threat they had not accounted for. The balance had shifted. And for the first time, the Galactic Senate was no longer certain of its verdict. Vorek's expression remained unreadable, but his grip on the data slate tightened. The silence in the chamber was no longer one of certainty, but of discomfort. The balance of power had shifted, but the opposition was not yet broken. There were always those who feared what they could not control. A murmur spread among the gathered representatives. Some were shaken, others merely calculating. Fear, uncertainty, opportunity, different minds processed the words in different ways. The divide was no longer as clear-cut as before. But there were still those who would never accept humanity, no matter the argument. A quiet signal passed between Vorek and the delegate beside him, an Ithar, whose species had long served as the enforcers of the Senate's will. A motion, subtle, but unmistakable. Ryland didn't need to see it. He felt the shift. The change in the air. The Ithar representative moved, too quick for most to register, but not for him. The concealed weapon, no doubt hidden under the guise of ceremonial authority, flicked forward, an almost imperceptible pulse of energy screaming through the air. Ryland turned. The shot passed within an inch of where his skull had been, slamming into the chamber wall with a hiss of vaporized stone. The assassin never got a second chance. Before anyone could react, Ryland moved. Not with the desperate scrabble of a man caught off guard, but with the practiced precision of someone who had spent his life in the grip of survival. His hand closed around the Ithar's wrist, twisting with just enough force to disarm, but not break, yet. Gasps, shouts of alarm, the sharp movement of guards reaching for weapons. But no one dared act first. Not yet. Rylan released the assassin with deliberate slowness, letting the Athar stagger back, clutching his arm. His voice was calm, almost thoughtful. So, this is how the Senate enforces its rulings now. Not with law, but with assassins in the middle of proceedings? Vorek did not flinch. He did not acknowledge the attempt, did not spare even a glance at the failed assassin. An unfortunate incident, he said smoothly. We will, of course, conduct an investigation. But I failed to see how this changes the matter at hand. Rylan let out a slow breath, shaking his head. It changes everything. He turned his gaze to the Senate as a whole, sweeping across the gathered representatives, forcing them to meet his eyes. You wanted a reason to fear us? To justify your decision? I could have died just now. Perhaps that would have been convenient for some of you. But I didn't. And that is the difference between humanity and the rest of you. His voice was quiet, but it carried. We do not break. We do not cower. We do not submit. A ripple of tension ran through the room, but no one interrupted. The truth is, Rylan continued, some of you were never afraid of what humanity might do. You were afraid of what we already are. You call us dangerous, violent, uncontrollable. But deep down, you know the truth. You need us. The galaxy is not the utopia you pretend it to be. There are threats in the dark that you do not speak of. Enemies that you have not yet faced. And when that day comes, it will not be your laws that protect you. It will not be your diplomacy. It will be people like me. A few of the delegates shifted uncomfortably, but some of them, just a few, listened. If humanity is to be judged, then do so honestly, he said. Not out of fear. Not out of politics. Judge us for what we are. He gestured to the still smoking impact of the assassination attempt. And if you cannot, then know this, you are not the ones deciding humanity's future. We are. Silence. Then a senator stood. One who had previously sat among those most vocal in their condemnation. A slow, deliberate movement. The vote, they said. We must vote. And with that, the chamber was forced to decide. The voting mechanism activated, a solemn hum resonating through the chamber as the delegates made their final decision. No more debates, no more speeches. Only the weight of consequence. One by one, the lights on the central display flickered, some green, some red. The tally grew, shifting unpredictably as alliances and fears clashed behind unreadable expressions. Some voted in favor of humanity's inclusion, others against. A few hesitated, then cast their choice with the slow acceptance of inevitability. Rylan stood motionless, arms crossed, face unreadable. He had said all that needed to be said. He had given them truth, unfiltered and absolute. If they refused to see it, if they chose fear over reason, then so be it. Humanity would find a way. They always did. The final light blinked. The chamber fell still. The Chancellor glanced at the display, then turned to face the assembly. His expression was impassive, but there was the barest hint of tension behind his eyes. He inhaled, controlled, deliberate. The vote is decided. The room held its breath. Humanity will not be quarantined. They are granted conditional membership under Senate law, with the stipulation that their expansion is monitored. A murmur of mixed reactions swept through the gathered species. Some showed relief, others discontent. A handful barely concealed their fury. But it was done. The verdict was final. Rylan exhaled slowly, the barest flicker of a smirk crossing his face. Not a victory, not entirely. But it was enough. Humanity had been given its place, however reluctantly. They would not be cast into the shadows, labeled a threat to be contained. The Chancellor continued, his voice firm but laced with the knowledge that something irreversible had occurred. This Senate will oversee all proceedings related to humanity's integration. Any violations of interstellar law will be met with. Rylan turned without another word. He had no interest in the formalities, the regulations they would try to impose. He had made his point. They knew now that humanity would not be shackled by fear or weak-willed diplomacy. As he moved past the rows of senators, some avoided his gaze. Others met it with cautious respect. A few with simmering resentment. At the far end of the chamber he paused. Glanced back just once. They judged us, he muttered under his breath. They feared us. Then, as he stepped through the towering entrance, his voice barely above a whisper. And now, they will never forget us.